We've got John. Ma'am, what's your name?
Elena.
Elena?
Felicia.
Felicia?
Darren.
Darren. Awesome. Okay, so welcome to writing science fiction. This is a topic that I don't know why I haven't done this one before, but it's going to be a lot of fun. To kind of go over, this is our agenda for the day. I'll do a brief introduction, talking about science factoids, sci-fi supremacy, the anatomy of sci-fi, hard versus soft science fiction. That's supposed to be 7 writing tips, not hashtag writing tips. That I got a little too eager with my typing. And then there will be a writing prompt, and we'll wrap up. For those of you who have not been to any of my workshops before, let me just introduce myself. My name is Garrett K. Jones. I'm a local author. I have 5 books in an ongoing fantasy series that I write. I'm working on book 6 in that series. I just had an anthology of short stories come out in February, which is available online through Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or you can get them directly from me.
How do you spell your first name?
Garrett. And then I'm constantly reading all the time. I'm listening to a lot of audiobooks. Right now I'm kind of stuck going through the first third or first half of a very long collection of H.P. Lovecraft. But most of what I read is either thriller or science fiction of some kind or another. I don't tend to read a lot of not sci-fi, but a lot of fantasy, just because I don't want to borrow from anybody else. So let's jump into this. Okay, so science fiction has ancient origins. And no, the origins aren't from aliens who built the pyramids. Regardless of what History Channel might have you believe, aliens have nothing to do with it. Although aliens show up frequently in science fiction. So the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh has a huge sci-fi basis because it has entities coming down from the heavens. And in a fantasy context, that would be gods, goddesses, and other celestial beings, but from a sci-fi lens, they can be looked at as otherworldly beings. One person's deity could be another person's extraterrestrial. The Indian epic of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. I'm going to butcher those names because they're not in my wheelhouse. Again, you have flying craft coming out of the heavens, kind of reminiscent of UFOs. You have otherworldly beings showing up on Earth, kind of bringing new technology or some kind of warfare or some other kind of help to humankind. And then it goes even further. Thomas More's Utopia and Faust's Legends could be considered proto-science fiction during the Enlightenment and Age of Reason. So once you get past the 1500s, that's where you start having less people focusing on folklore and mythology, and more people trying to focus on the ideas of science and how that gets applied with what they're seeing and what they're experiencing. Especially during the Age of Enlightenment and the Age of Reason, everything, they're looking for a logical reason for things to happen. And so science fiction, because there was a basis in science and a basis in research, that it boosted the popularity of the genre just a little bit. Shakespeare's The Tempest and Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels are considered science fiction because in Gulliver's Travels, for example, you have a character who's going into these other worlds and he's seeing people who are either massive giants compared to him, or they're little itty bitty, 1-inch figurine collectibles to him. And I would hesitate to even recommend watching the film with Jack Black because that just is a very, very bad take on Gulliver's Travels. if you go back and read through the actual story, the story is really fun. Although, part of the reason why Gulliver's Travels, for me, I think fits in with science fiction is the fact that it is satire. And science fiction is used a lot for satire or to explore philosophical concepts. The Tempest technically deals with magic and sorcery and weather manipulation, but there are some elements where it is science fiction based. Because, like, if you were to remove the science or the magic element to it, whatever the sorcerer, and I'm blanking on the name, Prospero. Thank you. Prospero is using a staff or a wand of some kind. It could be construed as some kind of antenna or technological piece of equipment that could be controlling the storms. And you see that in comic books, science fiction all the time, especially from like the 1940s or 50s moving forward. So those are some other medieval versions of, or Elizabethan versions of science fiction. Then we get into the 1800s, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and Victor Hugo's The Legend of the Centuries. Frankenstein especially is one of those books that is highlighted as being kind of the mother of modern science fiction, because it uses medical science of its time and makes some logical leaps in how the body operates. Before the 1800s, there wasn't really much of a real strong, solid theory with regards to like the electrical currents that run through our bodies. And so the fact that Frankenstein uses lightning and harnesses electricity to charge and bring his monster to life, excuse me, is a huge jump towards hard science fiction. Any questions so far?
Yes. I have, this is just there was once a teacher of mine, science fiction teacher, he said, he said, if in the 1700s you were to write a story about a traffic jam, that would be famous. But if you were to write a story about the people in the traffic jam, that would be science fiction.
I don't know how I necessarily feel about that, because, and the reason being is because Arthur C. Clarke has said that any technology that is sufficiently beyond our understanding can be construed as magic. So, I mean, if I was to, like this right here, all this is a little page turner device that I've got linked to my iPad, but if I took this with me, say, 100 years ago, this would feel like magic, because the idea of something being wireless and remote control for my devices would be beyond their concept.
Yeah, you would get put at the same.
Not 100 years ago. 100 years ago, I'd probably just get chased out of town.
400 years ago.
400 years ago, yeah, definitely.
No. Right.
And then I'd have to, wear some kind of like Nomex suit. That way they can't burn me alive. Okay, Jules Verne, Journey to the Center of the Earth, From the Earth to the Moon, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. These are staples of science fiction. I mean, how many times have they redone Journey to the Center of the Earth or 20,000 Leagues as a television program or as a film? H.G. Wells, The Time Machine and War of the Worlds are massive tentpoles of science fiction, to the point where, like, we've had, I don't know how many film, television, and radio broadcasts of War of the Worlds. In fact, if you ever get a chance, listen to the version that Orson Welles did back in the 1940s. That was epic. Like, I actually have a recording that I downloaded off of iTunes years ago, back when it was still called iTunes, and going through and just like sitting in a dark room listening to it as a radio broadcast is really cool, because it was done so well and so superbly that the people listening to it had no idea that it was even a radio broadcast for a story. They thought it was a real thing happening, and they freaked out.
So Orson Welles was a genius.
Oh, he was. He ate himself into a coma, but he was a genius. Then we get to L. Frank Baum, who wrote The Wizard of Oz. And while The Wizard of Oz does have some fantasy elements, there is a level of science fiction to it because you have characters like the Tin Man and the Wheelman in Return to Oz, who are basically variations of steampunk technology. And we'll talk about different types of subgenres in just a little bit. But there is some connection there. And then Robert Heinlein, who wrote Starship Troopers, that is a huge story, because that one right there, while it is a massive science fiction title, the film version that came out back in the 1990s, directed by that's going to kill me, I can't remember. But it was the same guy who directed the original RoboCop film from 1987. And his movies have a tendency to lean into the satire. It satirizes, it uses the sci-fi settings and tropes, and it satirizes hyper-nationalism, it satirizes warfare, it satirizes the propaganda that's promoted during warfare. And so if you go back and you watch it, you get a lot of that. Like, a lot of people didn't pick up on it. Yeah.
Isn't the books the opposite? Didn't he hate the movies because they're kind of the opposite message?
Kind of, yeah. I think because just because it was written back at a different time. I can't remember when Starship Troopers was written.
I think the books were kind of pro-mandatory military.
Yeah. Well, and so because it was like this idea of becoming a citizen, you should be serving in the military. In fact, a lot of European countries play that. I have a friend of mine who's originally from Germany. I went to high school with him. He came back for college, and after he graduated high school, he actually spent 2 years in the armed services in Germany, and then after that he was released, and that's how he earned his citizenship. Other countries have that requirement as well. And then Fritz Lang, who filmed the early 1920s, 1930s Metropolis film. It was a silent film, huge undertaking, some of the most practical special effects at the time, and it pushed the boundaries of what people knew of what they could do with filmmaking. As far as the supremacy goes, the genre has the unique ability to simultaneously explore both the familiar and the fantastical. All right? So let's jump back to Starship Troopers. We're familiar with the idea of warfare. We're familiar with what we see, with being able to see clips of war on the news or in the media. What it does, though, is it takes that familiar trope and it flips it on its head, where the enemy is not another group of human beings. It's not another nation. It's a planet full of these different types of bug casts, these insectoid, arachnoid aliens, and pits us against them. And we think, oh, they're just bugs. They're dumb. They can't think. They don't have brains, and yet they are completely coordinated. They have tactical plans, and they can actually decimate entire platoons of soldiers.
Which is exactly what happens to our enemies in the world, humans.
Well, and not just
we turn them into non-humans.
Well, not just that, but I mean, there is that mentality, yes. But what's interesting is that you see something like this idea in the movie Aliens. If you go back and you rewatch Aliens through the lens that it's really just a Vietnam movie, what you have are the xenomorphs being like the Viet Cong. They're able to hide really easily in the brush. They know the landscape of where they are. They know their environment better than the soldiers do, and they're able to come and go like ghosts, like shadows, and able to pick off and take out the soldiers who have higher quality technology and weapons. All it takes is for someone to know the layout better to take down a superior fire force. So it takes that familiar and that fantastical and works them in together. But sci-fi also explores the future. Most of the time when we see the future in science fiction, it looks great, but on the at least on the surface, beneath the surface, it is terrible. It is usually some kind of dystopian nightmare, or there's something just substantially wrong with the way that society has gone. There's a lot of social and political commentary. There's escapism and wonder. Some science fiction really leans into the escapism and the wonder, and looking at how the possibilities can be. So for example, you look at Back to the Future Part 2, when they jump into 2015. Unfortunately, our 2015 was not like that. I'm still waiting for my hoverboard. But there's a bit of escapism, there's a bit of wonder, because you get to see some really cool things. You get to see flying cars. You get to see sort of lifelike holograms being projected from movie theaters as advertisements. You get to see a lot of technology that we now have in the future. Like they had tablets that they could walk around with and watch on, or they had headphones that they would plug onto their head, and you could watch or take calls visually on that headset, or you could have a video call. And some of that stuff was even kind of prophesied in other projects like Star Trek. You look at Star Trek, and Star Trek was way ahead of its time. It had cell phones. It had tablet computers. It
VR.
had what?
VR, they had the holodeck.
Yeah, they had the holodeck. Dude, think about how cool it would be to have a holodeck. Instead of having a house, you'd have a holodeck. And then you could just feng shui it all you want. You wouldn't even have to move the furniture. It would be so much easier. So there's a lot of escapism and wonder, but there's also thought experiments. One of my favorite sci-fi books that I've encountered is a book called Red Shirts by John Scalzi. And John Scalzi does a lot with science fiction, and he does these thought experiments, and the story in this plays off the tropes of Star Trek, where the guys wearing the red shirts who have really no name, they're the lower deck guys, they're going on all these missions, and they're getting wiped out. Meanwhile, the commander's sitting there with, he should have a missing limb or something, and he's barely got a flesh wound going, oh, I can't fight. And so you've got all these guys getting killed off, and so what they end up doing, one of them realizes there's something very wrong with this world. And he and his buddies hijack a shuttle, they go to warp speed in one particular direction, and they find themselves in the real world, and they actually meet the actors who play them on TV. It gets weird, but it's really funny. There's another one that John Scalzi did that a friend of mine mentioned called When the Moon Hits Your Eye. And each chapter follows a day in the lunar cycle, and it's a what if the moon turned into cheese. It's still its same size, same mass, but it's all cheese. And so funny thought experiments. Sci-fi reflects the modern world. It's really good at reflecting the modern world. You take a look at Blade Runner and the corporatocracy that takes place even now. You take a look at how corporations operate with their employees in, say, a franchise like Alien, where the corporation realizes that their people are expendable. They will reflect on how we go about policing. Minority Report is a great example. I mean, it asks the question, what if you could stop the crime before it happens? Because then it begs the question, is there really such a thing as free will? Is there such a thing as autonomy? Can you make a choice and it go in a direction other than what people are predicting? And then of course, like I said with Star Trek, it inspires real science. the idea of having tablet computers and having more portable things was inspired by that. In fact, I remember growing up, and I'm sure some other people in this room probably had the same conversation. My dad was a math major, and he kept telling me that at no point was I going to ever have a device in my pocket that would magically give me the answers for everything in the world. It's sitting there filming me right now. Okay? They said it was never going to, he said it was never going to be possible, and he got proven wrong. So science fiction does a lot for inspiring people. Now, here's the anatomy of science fiction. We'll go about each of these in greater detail, but this is kind of what you're going to see. There's two parts to this list. This is part one. So you're going to encounter the story world. The story world may look similar to what we're dealing with now. It could be set in the modern day, or it could be set in a far-flung future. Or if you're going in the way of steampunk, something that is more closer towards like the Old West. You have a moral flaw, and that moral flaw can be imbued within a particular character, or it could be imbued within society. You're going to have minor characters, you're going to have desire, you're going to have authorities, plans. There we go. You're going to have subworlds, you're going to have a big reveal, a climactic battle, and some kind of self-revelation. So let's break down each one of these. So the story world. This is where world building is integral to science fiction. This is the rules for space-time, the physical laws, the technology. This is where you get to break down how everything in this world works. And this is where, like in science fiction, it's kind of a weird thing. Like when you're writing, there's this common adage of show, don't tell. The problem is, when you're writing a story, you have to do a bit of telling. You have to do expository. That rule of show, don't tell is actually a filmmaker's rule, where they need to let the camera show it on screen so that the actors don't have to tell about it later on. Okay? You want to see that setup. A great example for the world building is in the original Back to the Future, when you are introduced to Marty for the first time. You can see that it's early in the morning before school hours, because there's a gazillion clocks on the wall all ticking. In fact, the entire movie starts with the sound of ticking clocks. It's a blank black screen, you hear the ticking, and then it cuts to a door opening, a shoe stepping onto the floor, a bag being dropped down, a skateboard being dropped down. We still haven't seen Marty in full yet, and he's the first character that we get introduced to. There's all this setup of him getting ready to jam out on this huge speaker, and then it blows out. And then he gets a call from Doc Brown saying, "Hey Marty, the speaker's busted, don't use that." Followed by all the clocks going off at different intervals. He's like, "Oh good, my time experiment worked. It's actually this time." At which point we realize Marty's now late for school. Beautiful setup, because now we realize that this whole thing about Back to the Future is going to be dealing with time dilation and changing of clocks and the changing of time. And the stuff that we see with Marty being involved in, whether it's the music, his slacker attitude, whatever you see, all that world building is set up for us without anyone ever having to say a word. That is good storytelling. That's good filmmaking. So but as a writer, you want to be able to explain how something works. Don't get too technical about it, especially if you're not engineer-minded. But know the ins and outs, know the basics of a piece of technology. All right? Know how the physical laws work. If you aren't familiar with it, do a little bit of research. But it's really easy to do. Space-time is one of those things that's really interesting. There's a book that I cannot remember for the life of me what it's called, but there is a book that plays with the idea of time travel. That time travel is invented, but in order, like if I was to go back in time, say 5 months, I would pop up in the middle of outer space because the Earth was not where it is now 5 months ago. So you've got to figure out the physics behind that. And you could just simply figure out a tether to where the planet was at that particular time. Play with it how you will. There is, like I said, there's some fantastical elements. And this is where we'll talk about hard versus soft in a little bit. Okay, the next one, moral flaw. This is the protagonist's moral flaw, or as I said, this could also be the moral flaw of the entire society. And it can illustrate the implications of something flawed in the society. So one of my favorite sci-fi movies came out in the early 2000s, and it's called Equilibrium, starring Christian Bale. If you've never seen it, I highly recommend you watch it. It's really good. It takes place in a world post-World War III, where the idea of being able to feel emotions and to have any kind of emotive sense has become illegal. Everyone is required to take a 12-hour dose, and you get 2 a day. You're supposed to inject it mainline into your neck, and this substance prevents you from feeling any kind of emotion. If you are caught with art, with literature, anything that is not propagandized by the government, you are convicted of a sense crime, and you are executed on the spot or taken for incineration. It gets brutal. And there comes a point where Christian Bale's character misses his dose. And then he misses the next one. And then he misses the next one. And so for almost a week, he has become free of that drug, to the point where as he's walking, and he's a law enforcement officer, as he's walking to work, he pulls off the leather glove that separates him from the physical world, and he touches the handrail of the escalator. And it is breathtaking for him. And so it becomes this question of how does he dodge law enforcement? How does he avoid getting detected as someone committing a sense crime? He has to worry about his kids identifying him, Gestapo tactics being applied, and rooting him out as a traitor. And so his moral flaw of not being able to feel at the beginning becomes a moral flaw against society, because they've outlawed the very thing that makes us human. All right? Minor characters. These are characters that allow writers to flesh out the story's world and account for a large part of your story's success. All right? Side characters, minor characters, these are the things that make it feel real. It's like, for anybody who's ever played a video game, if you're playing a game and you're embodying a character that's just basically a blank slate for the player, the world is going to get filled in by those minor characters. How the character chooses to operate, the choices they make, the decisions that are involved, the pros, the cons, the consequences, all of that is stemming from those other characters. How does the character talk with other characters? How does your main character interact with them? Does he avoid? Excuse me, let me back up. Does he avoid interacting with other people, or does he like being with other people? And what do those other people look like? Are they other humans? Are they cyborgs? Are they aliens from another dimension? What are they? Is it an artificial intelligence that he interacts with on a regular, consistent basis? How your characters interact is going to build that world. It's going to build the realism as far as how the story flows. There was a book that I encountered. I helped to publish it, and the author did something very, very interesting. There are 3 female characters in the story, and it centers around them. And usually, and this is what the author said, usually when you have a group of ladies get together like that, things can go very, very well, or they can go very, very bad very quickly, because of the different personalities, the different basis of who they are. And what you actually see is, instead of a trio of young women in the story getting on each other's cases and being disruptive in each other's lives, they're actually very supportive of each other. And you see that building of these characters. And so that's one example of how you can play around with the way your main character and your minor characters interact. All right, the next one is desire. This is going to be a big one because it helps drive the plot as it is central to the protagonist's goals. And this is where we get into positive versus negative sci-fi. Whatever that desire is going to jumpstart the plot. It's going to drive everything that happens in the story. So, how many of you have watched Total Recall? Okay. Whether you watch the Arnold Schwarzenegger version or the Colin Farrell version, the impetus of the story is the same desire. You have this character, Doug Quaid, who is completely bored with his humdrum life. He's got a great wife, he loves her, he cherishes her, but he's just feeling kind of just stuck in his life. He's working a blue-collar job. It's not fun for him. He goes to work, he goes home. It's day in, day out, the same cycle. So he desires to have a little bit of a vacation. He's convinced to go to Recall, to go have some kind of temporary memory put into his head, and he chooses, hey, I'm going to live a little vicariously. I want to be a spy. Turns out he's actually a real spy. And that whole thing triggers his memories, prompting the government to show up and starting to hunt him down. And that drives the plot. That desire to figure out who he is, that desire to figure out what the truth is, when truth seems so relative, is what drives him. Okay, and that's an example of a positive arc. But then you have a character like if you were to jump to Blade Runner, okay, where you have the Tyrell Corporation. Eldon Tyrell wants to take over the world. That's what drives him. But he also wants to figure out a way to live forever. And so that's what prompts him to make the replicants. But the replicants start turning bad. They start turning against their masters, and that becomes problematic. You see something similar in Isaac Asimov's I, Robot. So think about how that desire drives the story, because that desire can be reflected on not just by the main character, but other side characters. Especially if you're dealing with something in the cyberpunk subgenre. Cyberpunk is driven specifically by technology and having access to technology. In the remake of Total Recall, there is a scene where Colin Farrell's version of Doug Quaid, he starts getting a phone call, and it's not a phone that he pulls out of his pocket, it's coming from his hand. He has to hold his hand up, and so he eventually realizes that he can be tracked with that, just like any other cell phone, so he cuts it out. And this kid just sitting on the street goes, "Can I have that? That is so cool, I want that." He just watched a phone get cut out of some guy's hand, and this kid wants it. All right? So think about how that desire, whether it's a desire for technology, a desire for eternal life, a desire for whatever it is, drives your characters. Authorities. Pitting your protagonist against the system contrasts the positive versus negative themes of your story. This is going to be a huge thing. Whether it is being a replicant on the run and trying to deal with a Blade Runner who's hunting them down. Whether it is your corporation who's blaming you for blowing up and nuking your spaceship because you were trying to avoid an alien killer. Or maybe it's you found a brand new alien as your pet and you want to keep it, but then the government shows up and tries to kidnap it, and you're just trying to get it home. That's ET, by the way. All right. The authorities are going to have a big place in this. If you don't have the authorities showing up at some point to cause trouble, then you're missing the point of science fiction. Because at some point the authorities are going to come in. Maybe the authorities are going to come in to help, but if they're not showing up at all, that becomes problematic. Any questions so far? Okay. And if I'm going too fast, let me know. I have a tendency of getting a little anxious. All right, so your plans. Your main character needs to have a plan to fulfill their desire. Even if the goal begins to feel more and more impossible. In fact, they need to be able to adapt their plans. So say, for example, you've got a character who is trying to get off-world. They're trying to get back to their home planet or something. Make it harder and harder for them to get access to a ship. Make it harder and harder to get access to the funds to pay for passage. Make it harder and harder for them to get whatever it is that they're trying to go for. Okay? You want to raise those stakes, because the higher you raise those stakes, the more drama, the more conflict it's going to create for your character, and it's going to show how adaptable they have to be. Okay? Subworlds. These environments provide trials for your main character to work through and overcome. One of the things I love about Star Wars, especially in the original trilogy, is that every single one of the original films in Star Wars has 3 environments. In the original film, you have Tatooine, which is a desert environment. You have the Death Star, which is this very sterile military base. Everything's monochrome. Everything's metal, everything's tile, everything's glass. And then you have Yavin 4, which is a forest moon. Very nice, very peaceful, very arboreal. Okay? And the first 2 environments are very, very harsh environments. The third one is a little bit more pleasant to go to. All right? In Empire Strikes Back, you have Hoth, which is essentially a desert planet. It's just a different kind, because it's all ice, it's all snow. Nothing else grows there. Everything there eats whatever's living, because that's how they are. You have Dagobah, which is a swamp planet. And if you notice in Star Wars, all these environments are always like, it's like this mega version. It's like, we'll take this one bit of environment that spreads over the entire planet, which that's not even scientifically possible, but whatever, we'll just let George Lucas do what he does. And then the third environment is Cloud City. So it's a gas planet, it looks like everything's among the clouds, everything looks like, very heavenly, very beautiful. And then we jump to Return of the Jedi, where again, we're back on Tatooine, so the desert planet. We do see Dagobah again, and we do see the Death Star again. But then we get another arboreal planet, and that's the moon of Endor. So we get to rehash some of those environments, but then we get a new one. And so you look at how those environments play a part in the larger world for your characters. All right. Next is the reveal. Often involves the main character's opponent, but can lead to self-revelation. This presents your character with choices. Probably one of the biggest reveals in all of science fiction, I'm sorry, spoiler alert, Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father. Okay? Big deal. That broke audiences in 1980, and when I showed that to my 8-year-old a couple years ago, he's like, what? It blew his mind, and now he doesn't want to watch Star Wars. But the reveal comes at the cost of Luke Skywalker's sense of self. Before, he thought his father, so let's go back. For 18 years of his life, he believed his father was a pilot who died on a spice freighter. That's what his aunt and uncle told him. Then he learns from Obi-Wan Kenobi that his father was a Jedi Knight who was betrayed by Obi-Wan's pupil, Darth Vader, who later killed him. Then he comes to find out Darth Vader might be my dad. And so when he encounters Obi-Wan Kenobi in Return of the Jedi, he's like, you told me Vader betrayed and murdered my father. And what Kenobi says is, what I told you was true, from a certain point of view. he's twisting the facts. Why? Because Obi-Wan Kenobi was actually trying to radicalize a farm boy into a new religion. But it presents Luke with choices. Because up through the majority of Empire Strikes Back, he was willing to go head-to-head with Vader and fight and protect his friends. Now he's unsure of whether or not he even wants to fight Vader because that's his dad. And then he's presented with the choice to kill Vader again, where he goes and they go into this huge knockdown, drag-out fight, lightsaber to lightsaber. He cuts off his own father's hand just like his dad cut off his own. And why? Because Vader threatened to turn Leia to the dark side. And he wanted to protect his sister. Every revelation that Luke goes throughout the original trilogy presents him with new choices that affect what he's going to do throughout the trilogy. So when you're writing your characters, when you're writing out whatever this big reveal is, how does it impact them? What kind of choices is it going to leave them with? Then we've got a climactic battle. The fighters, the dynamic opposition of forces must converge. Whether this is in a race to destroy the Death Star before it can fire on the Rebel base, whether this is a final battle between Ripley and the Alien Queen, who somehow smuggled herself aboard a dropship. Whatever that conflict is, it's going to have to come to a head. Okay, it's been building to this. There has to be a confrontation, because it's not just a confrontation of forces, it's a confrontation of ideas. Science fiction is about ideas. And those ideas have to clash, and it's going to come out not just sociologically, not just ideologically, it's going to come out physically. Think about what goes on in your favorite sci-fi movie, whatever that is. And it's going to come out in a physical fight. I mentioned Equilibrium just a little bit ago. In that movie, Christian Bale's character is presented with an award, but it's actually a trap to have him come in. They want to test him with a polygraph machine to see how he's feeling. And they keep asking these questions and dropping all these things that they've been learning about him, and it's just making him angrier and angrier. And you can see that marker on the polygraph is just going wild. It's just wagging back and forth. His emotions are spiking. Then all of a sudden it flatlines. Not because he's pulled off any of the sensors, but because he has figured out how to focus himself where the emotions aren't getting the better of him, and he's recreated his baseline. And he kills everybody in the room. And then when he is presented with the guy who's actually leading the country, it's not the guy that everyone sees on their TV screen, it's some other guy that he's been working for 10 years. This guy's like, whoa, hold on. I feel too. I ceased my dose years ago too. This guy's been living the same way, but the difference is he's been in control. He's been reinforcing all the laws, even though he himself is not feeling. And so what does Christian Bale's character do? Kills him. And then he ends up destroying all the computers that run all the propaganda, because then, without the constant reinforcement of, you have to take your dose, you have to take your dose, you have to take your dose, emotions are the enemy, people can now be free to choose. But you also need to focus on battles and consequences. In releasing those people from the propaganda of their country, what Christian Bale's character does is he risks people's emotions running amok, people having been unexposed to their own ability to feel for years, having to deal with emotions for the first time while they're not being medicated against it. What are the repercussions? What are the consequences, good or bad, that come from that? Are they going to start a war? Is there going to be more crime, like actual crime? What's going to happen? Is the society going to collapse, or is it going to thrive? So, like I said, the climactic battle isn't just the physical fight. That's where it comes out. That's how it culminates. But it's a battle of ideas. Then there's self-revelation. And this involves the protagonist's vision for the evolution of their society, focusing on something morally healthier. Whatever that looks like. Whether it's being able to feel regardless of the consequences. Whether it is, you know, question.
When you talk about the protagonist, there's no particular reason why there can't be two protagonists.
Right.
That's why I asked.
Yeah. You can have multiple protagonists. You can have multiple antagonists. In fact, what I would recommend is when you're thinking about how you want to write protagonists and antagonist characters, have them be mirror images of each other. Okay? One of the things that makes characters like Batman and the Joker work so well is that they are mirror images of each other. Batman wears the dark clothing, the capes, he dresses like a scary animal, he hunts bad guys at night, and there are scenes where kids are afraid of him. The Joker, he's dressed very garishly, he's got a lot of bright colors, which usually superheroes are the ones with the bright colors, not the other way around. He has the face of a clown, which is supposed to be an image for children, and yet he's the monster. So play around with that. You know, the Joker also works as a mirror for Batman psychologically, because the Joker is what's referred to as super sane. Like, he knows he's crazy. He knows that what he is doing is bad. He doesn't care. Batman, on the other hand, questions his own sanity half the time, because he doesn't think of himself as Bruce Wayne. He thinks of himself as Batman, and Bruce Wayne is the mask. That may not be psychologically healthy. So play around with your characters, who your antagonist is, who your protagonist is, and let them be mirrors for each other, both, maybe not even, it doesn't have to be physically, but definitely ideologically, especially in science fiction. What was your question?
Yes, in my story, I have two protagonists, and it's a love story.
Okay.
It's not a love story like you're thinking. It's a father-daughter love story.
That's cool.
And actually there are three love stories going on at the same time, all with the same one protagonist. But the other protagonist is the daughter, so she's not directly about the other ones. The other two love stories are between the protagonist and his dead wife, and the protagonist and his future wife. And in fact, those two people, all three of those, it's kind of a triangle, right? But it's active. That's all the science fiction part. So does any of that really, like, yeah, okay?
I mean, it's fine. It depends on, I mean, at that point, you want to play around with how, you know, what kind of revelation that they're going to do with what the world is and how they interact with it.
Oh, yeah.
So, all right. So I like to throw in quotes from time to time, and this is one from Octavia E. Butler. Science fiction frees you to go any place and examine anything. If you guys saw the ad on social media for this class, one of the things that pops up is the question, what if? And we'll come back to that in just a moment. But this is the difference between hard and soft sci-fi. Hard sci-fi emphasizes scientific accuracy and plausibility. One of the books that I've read in the last year that I thought was really a whole heck of a lot of fun was a book called Lost in Time by A.G. Riddle. And it's about this, it kind of feels like there's some stuff pulled from Michael Crichton's Timeline, if you've ever read that book. But in the premise of Lost in Time, the government has been looking for a way to create teleportation, quantum teleportation, to make shipping across the country so much faster, so much easier. And what they end up finding out is that they're not creating teleportation, they're creating time travel by mistake. And so what they're actually doing is they're sending, it's not even our timeline, it's actually a fragment timeline. And so like everything that they keep sending through that portal goes to like the Jurassic or Cretaceous period 60 to 95 million years ago, but in a branched timeline. So nothing that they send back is actually getting affected in our timeline. Well, to some extent, because of how far back they go. But what they use it for is, instead of executing criminals, they end up using it to, they use this new technology to send criminals back through time, giving them another chance at life. Yeah, it's not going to be probably as easy for them. They're not going to have the comforts of being in a prison cell with 3 square meals a day and cable. But, you know, they're still alive. They're not being given lethal injection or the chair. They just may have to face down a T-Rex or something like that. And so one of the scientists who worked on this technology, he is arrested for the murder of someone, and he is sent back in time. And I don't want to spoil it because I think it's a great book, and I would recommend that you guys read it. But one of the things that they do is they pay attention to the science behind it. They get really into the physics behind what they're doing. And it was a lot of fun to listen to and to read. Soft sci-fi prioritizes social and psychological themes with less strict focus on the accuracy or physical laws. And this is where you see things like, for example, the Aliens franchise. The Aliens franchise would be considered more soft sci-fi because it goes into the psychological element, it goes into the horror element, and there is a sociological discussion at play underlying the whole thing. But the focus there is more on the story, not the science itself. So the fact that they have faster than light travel, but it's not really faster than light travel, and so they're having to go into hyperspace or hypersleep or whatever it is, or they go into cryo. Those elements, you know, those aren't things that we have in this day and age, and they don't really go into a whole lot of detail to explain it.
That's important.
Yeah.
Star Trek did that a lot. You just don't explain it.
They started explaining it more in the Next Generation, and you know, basically from like 1987 moving forward, they did a little bit more explanation as far as how certain things work, because then they had to explore it depending on what the script called for. But even then, it was, because it was all future technology, it's, you know, whatever. Star Wars is another example of soft sci-fi. Because Star Wars technically is space opera. Because it blends both fantasy elements and sci-fi together. But it's considered more soft sci-fi because while there are rules for how like light speed is supposed to work, if you were to look at the actual reality of faster than light travel, it doesn't work like that. Like, you would not, like, everybody else would age in between the time it takes you to jump from like Coruscant to Alderaan, which is like a day. But like, if you were having to travel for 2 weeks in light speed, everybody would be 2 weeks older by the time you arrive. You would still feel the same. So it's kind of a weird, yeah. The physics aren't really.
And that's the whole reason you don't explain things.
Right, and then at that point, like, and that, don't get me started on that, because in the movie Solo, like, they break their own laws of physics when Han tells Luke, you can't just jump into hyperspace. You have to actually calculate and navigate toward and make the calculations that you need to. Otherwise, you'll jump into a star or a supernova or an asteroid, and that'll end your trip really quick. But then we get to Solo, and he does light speed skipping, and I'm just like. So, we're going to talk about 7 tips for writing sci-fi. Let's see where we're at on the. Oh, good, we're making good time. Okay, 7 tips for writing sci-fi. First one, decide on your themes. Science fiction explores heavy themes like race, gender, class, reality. The themes, these are going to be universal. The themes often ask big questions, starting with the words, what if? What if the moon was made of cheese? What if you had a mole of moles? What,
Looks like Caleb winning that a lot.
right? What if, how much energy does Yoda expend raising Luke Skywalker's X-Wing fighter out of the swamp? The answer to that, actually, there is an answer to that. There's a book called What If that answers that question. What if there were genetically modified super soldiers? What if you fell into a parallel universe? What if aliens are afraid of humans? And that's why they don't contact us. All right? Your themes should ask this question of what if. Tip number 2, start in the past. Think back to how the world of the story got to this point. What did the world look like before the events of the story? The backstory informs how the plot unfolds.
What about if that, okay, you got this difference, like what mine is, in today's world, there's one difference, just like Caleb.
What's that one difference?
There are 2 sentient species.
Okay.
And so during the story, you find out how this second sentient species came about and why we hadn't noticed this for a million years.
Okay, well, and that's fine. And the fact that you do explain it in a later story is fine.
Okay.
But you, when you're starting the writing process, you need to know what
that.
that origin is beforehand.
It only took me about 3 stories to realize that the author needs to know everything first.
Right. Yeah, and just because, and this is another thing, is just because you know all the details doesn't mean your reader needs to know all the details. All right. So start in the past. Know how the story, the world of your story got to where it is before the story starts. Tip number 3, plan your societies. The more detail you plan in advance, the richer your world and its story will be. The same applies for fantasy as well. Keep the science in the forefront, because if it's not there, you aren't writing true science fiction. So if there's no science involved, you're writing fantasy, you're writing magic. And that creates a whole different discussion on hard magic systems versus soft magic systems. And if you want that, I've got a link for a fantasy writing workshop I did a couple months ago. But you need to make sure that your societies are developed, that you have a structure for them. Usually there's kind of an us versus them mentality involved. Thinking back to Total Recall, you've got the people who live on Earth, who live much better than the people who live on Mars. Because Mars is a colony, but they're treated like crap by the governments on Earth, and the corporations on Earth who run their colony. Sounds very familiar to what colonial America dealt with England, or Spain, or any other place where a colony started based on who colonized there. But think about how that environment is. I'm working currently on a kind of a cyberpunk, sci-fi, military sci-fi story, and what's happened is it takes place about 300 years from now, give or take, but the world became united as one united government. And then my main character, while he was in hypersleep, drifting through space for the span of like 20 years, something like that. In that 20-year span, the world has gone back to its divisions. And the divisions are this. The British government has wiped out Russia through a black flag operation. They've taken over the majority of Western Europe. They've taken over Canada, the United States, Australia. And so they are now one government operated by out of London, with offices all over the planet. Japan has been turned into a prison with walls surrounding all of the islands, perimeters. The Chinese government has taken over most of Eastern Asia, and they've become their own conglomeration. And that goes from all the way from like from the Korean Peninsula all the way down into Southeast Asia. India has been left alone. And then there is a new Persian caliphate that operates out of Tehran and covers most of North Africa, most of the Middle East. And then South America and Sub-Saharan Africa are basically just black markets that have been left alone. They're wilds. Nobody goes in. The people who go in, they might be able to live freely, but at the same time, it's going to be really rough. And so that's what my main character is going to be walking back in when he gets back to Earth. So think about how you want to structure that world. Tip number 4, develop your technology. Technology is as integral to science fiction as dragons are to fantasy. In fact, here's a fun thought. The reason why fantasy worlds tend to not get super developed in their technology is because of dragons. Who needs guns when you have a living, breathing airship that, breathes fire and mutilates things in mass? So you need to make sure that you have your technology locked in. Even if it's just one piece of technology, whatever that technology is, know what it does backwards and forwards. Does it help or hurt? Who has access? How is it powered? What are the dangers? Are there current real-world examples of that technology? How does the tech serve the themes? All right. So if you're asking yourself those questions about the technology, answer them with as much detail as you possibly can, and you'll be really able to flesh out the technology in your world. Tip number 5, craft your characters. When you create your characters, keep your themes in mind. Now, you don't necessarily have to apply a theme right away when you're writing. Maybe you're just flying by the seat of your pants and you're creating the story as you go. But the character's traits and flaws should help you explore the themes that you want to embed within your story. Is your character a truth seeker? Are they looking for a definition of reality? The Matrix is a great example of themes and characters exploring those themes, because Neo is a hacker. He is breaking the system. He's trying to get beyond what he sees, and he's trying to figure out what the Matrix is. He works with code. That's what he does. And when you fast forward through the franchise, he's able to see the code. He doesn't just think about it, he can see it. When he's looking at a person, he's not seeing a person with their physical characteristics. He's seeing them as a three-dimensional model of ones and zeros. So think about how that would play in a character like that. Tip number 6, solve or cause a problem. Your plot is how your characters either solve or create problems, and the technology of your story should be intrinsic to that problem. If you're dealing with something involving time travel is one of those things that can be very, very tricky. Okay? And the reason being is because you need to know about paradoxes. Alright? Like the bootstrap paradox. Does anybody know what the bootstrap paradox is? What is it?
It's a paradox. It's kind of a little bit tricky, but let's say, I think Futurama did it best I could do is when Fry and the Planet Express crew goes back to Nevada, Roswell, Fry accidentally kills his grandfather, and then he actually becomes his own grandfather.
Yeah, so what he's referring to is there's an episode of Futurama where they go back in time. Fry finds the man that he thought was his grandfather and ends up accidentally killing him. By the laws of physics, that should cause him to cease to exist almost immediately. Unfortunately, he doesn't, because it's a bootstrap paradox. So Fry ends up sleeping with the woman that was his grandmother, which produces his line of relatives, which lead to him being born.
Is the
So-
story called I Am My Own Grandfather?
Pretty much. I don't remember what the title of the episode is called, but that is pretty much that. But that's a bootstrap paradox. A bootstrap paradox is basically if I go back in time and I do something that should irrevocably destroy me, but I don't get destroyed, what I did was supposed to happen. And it's going to create a causal loop. And so that becomes a fixed point in time. So play around with it, know what the paradoxes are for time travel and how to avoid them. But use it to create a problem or solve a problem, whatever it is. But the technology should be at the key of that. That's just one example. Finally, tip number 7. Read the genre and do your research. The reading the reading part is simple, but researching the science of your science fiction to know how to explain it, the way that it works and how, the effect it has, that's going to be the hard part. When you're reading science fiction, depending on what kind of story you're wanting to tell, read stuff that is in that vein. Okay, read, if you want to tell some kind of sci-fi horror, read sci-fi horror. If you want to read, if you're wanting to tell a story that is military sci-fi, read military sci-fi.
And read the best authors.
No, not always. Sometimes reading the worst authors can be helpful because you might get an idea from something that they wrote, but you'll see a better way of doing it than they did. Case in point, I listened to an audiobook a few months ago, and I can't, for the life of me, remember what it was. That's how much it doesn't stick with me. But I found myself bored as I'm listening to this thing play out and play out, and it was a war against some kind of alien entity probe out beyond the far, by Pluto or something like that, and it was driving me crazy because like half the time the main character was talking about his own personal issues stemming from having grown up as it was like he had special needs or something like that, and it was a great characterization. I was so bored because he kept talking about things that were inconsequential to the rest of the story. So think about, as you're reading, how, what kind of a story do you want to tell? Because what is interesting to you? Because if it's interesting to you, it will be interesting to the people who read it. All right? But the research part I want to caution you guys on, because doing any kind of research can be a rabbit hole of endless searches. Because at some point what's going to happen is you're going to get distracted from the writing process, from the creative process, and at some point you're just going to put the pen down and you're going to stop writing altogether. Because you've got yourself so bogged down with the research that you have nothing else, you have no energy for anything else. So what I tend to do is if I'm in the middle of writing something and I have a question about, well, how does this work? I will jump on my phone really quick and I will Google that. And then I have to be careful, because if I'm on my phone and I finish Googling the answer and I get what I need, my phone's still open, and at that point I'm going to be like, oh, what's happening on Instagram? And then I spend the next 20 minutes on Instagram goofing around with people. And then I'm like, crap, I've only written one word and it's been 20 minutes. I cannot tell you the number of times this has happened. Or, better yet, I watch a how-to video to give myself like a step-by-step for something I'm trying to create in the story. I will watch that, And I have a tendency of writing while I'm laying down on my floor. I'll be just like, and I will pass out. I'll have missed everything in that 20-minute video or 5-minute video or whatever it was. And my research has been for nothing because I ended up passing out. So be careful about how you go about doing your research. Set a time limit for yourself. If you're doing research, try to avoid social media as much as possible because that itself is a trap, to quote Star Wars. All right, here we go. Here's your writing prompt. I'm going to give you guys about 15 minutes to work on it. What if humans have been cloned by scientists for decades, and the sense of deja vu is because of people being cloned over and over again? This is your prompt. Have fun writing. And for those of you who've been joining us on the live stream, thank you. Live stream is now done.